right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy lives to be here with us either in person or via the live stream for this final lecture recital of mine here at Northwestern. I really, really appreciate it. The subject of tonight's lecture portion of the lecture recital is composer Stephen Lias, and specifically Mount Rainier Search and Rescue. So you've already received an introduction to some of his music with our first three pieces, but let's go ahead and dive right into this. So why are we here? What are we doing? Why is this important? This project was born out of experience that I've had with Steve Lias's music over the past 4 years and a desire to raise awareness of that work. I was first exposed to Mount Rainier Search and Rescue in 2020 as a grad student at the University of Minnesota, and that really cemented Stephen in my mind as a composer to watch and explore further in the future if I got the opportunity to do that. Fast forward to Northwestern in spring of 2023, and I was able to give a presentation to the wind conducting seminar on Stephen's life and work, as well as Mount Rainier Search and Rescue. And for that, I was also able to sit down and speak with him for almost 2 hours. And it was my hope then to make that project into the project that you're all experiencing today with this lecture recital. I have to thank Stephen for being incredibly generous with his time. He's offered invaluable insight into his own life and music for this project, as I mentioned, taking a lot of time to speak with me and even rearranging some of his own music for this event, and so I really appreciate that. The goals of this study are really twofold. The first is to introduce audiences and later readers for the accompanying paper to Stephen Lias, both as a person and as a composer. I also want to introduce that same group of people to Mount Rainier Search and Rescue, the piece that first introduced me to his work. There is the unpublished backstory of the incident depicts, as well as the piece itself. And ultimately, with all of this, we're hoping to inspire others to explore Stephen's work themselves. And as an added bonus, this project got to add a work to the wind repertoire. The piece you heard just before intermission, The Quest, originally written for string quartet with the rest of the instrumentation that you saw, and Stephen was kind enough to rearrange that work to be for winds only, adding saxophone quartet, so we're really appreciative of that. To give you just a brief introduction to Stephen, he grew up on the East Coast, had a very musical upbringing. Says that his parents were often playing records of classical music in the house, and his mother also played piano. He now lives in Nacogdoches, Texas, where he is professor of composition at Stephen F. Austin State University, and he refers to himself in his bio as an adventurer composer, which I think is interesting, but also very apt, as you'll see in just a moment. He has degrees from Messiah College, now Messiah University, Stephen F. Austin State, and also Louisiana State University. Now, as part of that almost 2-hour-long interview, the benefit of that is that you all can hear some of his own perspectives from the man himself. So here is how he got started in his own words.
Well, starting in music, back in high school is when I was in a music program in high school, and I was not good at anything else. So that tends to help define what you did in your life. I wasn't athletically inclined. I'm a small guy, but I was good at music. I had a great ear. I could play the piano. I could sing. I kind of did the high school actor, conductor, performer, musician, kind of everything. And that was sort of when I decided that would be my focus for my music degree. So I got an undergraduate degree in music education, actually with an emphasis in voice, and did some student teaching and things, and then decided that teaching in public school wasn't going to be my thing. But I was composing music right from the start, and then it was in my master's degree that I really started feeling like I was not just a musician who composed, but maybe I was a composer, and that was my main thing.
We also can't talk about Stephen Lias without mentioning nature and the outdoors. Though as you just heard him say, he was not overly outdoorsy in his youth or athletic. He did start kayaking and skiing in his 30s, and he discovered that he rather liked outdoor activities as long as there wasn't a coach screaming at him the whole time. But he didn't yet connect that love of the outdoors with music until about 2009, where he applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship. And the aim of that proposal was to be a composer in residence at the National Park Service. And although that Guggenheim Fellowship didn't end up panning out, he did start doing it anyway. He started writing solo instrumental pieces based on national parks and eventually started applying to their artist in residence programs and had a great deal of success doing that as well. Over the last dozen years or so, that trajectory has gained a lot of momentum for him, peaking around in 2016 with the centennial of the National Park Service. Today, his National Park series of music is a large portion of his output and perhaps what he is best known for. So when I asked Stephen about his principal influences as a composer, he immediately went to John Williams as the composer that got him interested in music. He was also later heavily involved with Leonard Bernstein and work in musical theater. And so as a result, his music tends to be programmatic or cinematic in nature, though not always. It's often evocative of something or outright depicting something. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that.
Well, influences, you always have to bear in mind that I am in my mid-50s, which means that I was 12 years old when Star Wars came out. So, that's not a trivial matter. The first orchestral music that entered my consciousness was John Williams. And so that's a legacy that I've sort of had my whole life, that I was very influenced by the music of my youth. And then also in my college years, I think I was most influenced by Leonard Bernstein. I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation on Leonard Bernstein. And I worked for over 10 years at the Texas Shakespeare Festival, both as their composer and their music director. And so I've got a long history in musical theater, as well as traditional chamber and concert music, and Leonard Bernstein was a big part of that. So I've got sort of equal parts John Williams and Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim, and then a whole panoply of chamber and concert music composers from the last 30 years who have influenced my music. So that's sort of the landscape of sounds that are going on in my head.
Now, when I asked Stephen about his compositional style, he had kind of an interesting answer. He characterizes his own music as being on the accessible side, that referring, of course, to tonality and approachability by the lay person. Though he immediately segues, you'll notice in this clip, to saying that the audience experience is paramount. His goal is not so much personal expression as it is communicating something to all of you out there.
It's always no composer is good at answering that question.
Yeah.
For one really important reason. And I will answer your question, but the disclaimer has to come first. Every composer fancies themselves a very multifaceted creator. And when I think about my output, I think of them, so the spectrum of pieces I've written, as wildly diverse. Maybe other people don't think of them that way, and that's fine. But as the artist, I think all of us as artists like to think that we're not just recycling our stuff and writing in one channel. That each new piece, we're exploring a new channel or a new direction, or we're stretching ourselves in a new direction. And so when you ask an artist, how do you pigeonhole yourself? That's a question that every artist resists. We're like, no, I don't want to pigeonhole myself. And so I think I'm one of those people that likes to approach each piece as a new challenge and likes to use different harmonic vocabularies in each piece. Certainly, I would say that in the cast of characters who we think of as the current contemporary classical music, I fall on the accessible side. Certainly, I'm very interested in my music communicating to an audience, which is a central facet of how you frame your work. There are great composers who I admire who were writing music as a form of personal self-expression, not as a form of communication with an audience. They wrote great music that does communicate with audiences, but to them, they were writing something that they needed to get on paper rather than writing something that they needed to say something to an audience. I'm always thinking about the person in the dark in red velvet chair. I'm always thinking about what experience they will have, what they will take away from the piece. It's okay with me if many different people have many different experiences with my piece, but I do feel like I'm communicating. That's my goal, is to communicate something to an audience member. And because of that, I think I lean toward music that can be understood.
When I asked him about his compositional process, how he approaches each piece anew, he said that he takes a unique approach to each piece based on the idea that inspired it. Programmatic pieces have slightly more of a concrete process that usually starts with research. If he's writing about something real or tangible, he wants to know about that topic first. But he takes a variety of different approaches that you'll hear him speak about next to rhythm, harmony, melody. And if you're like me and had to look up this term after the interview, he'll use the term DAW a couple times in this clip. That stands for Digital Audio Workstation. Here's what he had to say about this.
This is another one. I know a lot of composers who are good at answering this question, and my answer is that each piece dictates a new process for me. I do not always start in a certain way or progress in a certain way. I can tell you the range of them, though. Some pieces start as pure music. Some pieces start as a programmatic idea, like Mount Rainier Search and Rescue did. So my music is not always about something, but it often is. Then sometimes it starts with pencil and paper. Sometimes it starts in notation software. Sometimes it starts in a DAW, like in Logic or something, which alleviates me the necessity of having to think about what meter am I in, or what note value is this. Then, if I'm working in a DAW, then I'm just playing sound. And once I like the sound, then I can figure out how I might notate it. And so there are other pieces where I start out with the notation and work from there. So it varies quite widely. Sometimes with a large ensemble piece, I'm working with a short score and then move to large score. Sometimes I write large score from the beginning. If it's programmatic, I tend to do a bunch of research first. And then I tend to ask myself, what would be a good way of starting this piece? I don't just go to whatever I did last time. I say, maybe this will be a piece where I start at the piano. Maybe this will be a piece where I start with a sketch pad and draw shapes and lines and rhythms on the sketch pad. Maybe I'll go to a DAW. Maybe I'll, and I just let the creative process sort of unfold at its own pace in whatever way it wants to.
And that brings us to what will be the last piece on tonight's program, Mount Rainier Search and Rescue. It was originally written for Nathan Knabb and the Explorium Chamber Ensemble as a special request to be specifically written for saxophone quartet and percussion ensemble, which you see behind me. It was premiered in Taiwan in 2011 and depicts the events of a 2004 climbing accident on Mount Rainier and the ensuing rescue efforts that occurred over the following 3 days. It involved Scott Richards, pictured here on your right, as well as Peter Cooley on the left. And during this incident, Cooley suffered a fall and a traumatic head injury, but conditions on the mountain prevented rescue teams from reaching them for the 3 days afterward. Rescue did eventually reach them. However, Cooley was evacuated and ultimately passed away en route to the hospital. In order to really understand this piece and take the full impact of it, you need to know exactly what happened during the incident. So we'll give you a little bit of a play-by-play here. On May 15th, 2004, around 6 a.m., Cooley and Richards were ascending Liberty Ridge on Mount Rainier, around 12,000 feet or so. Cooley's crampon caught and he fell. Richards was able to arrest this fall, but too late. Cooley had fallen approximately 30 feet and suffered severe head trauma as well as injuries to his left arm and leg. Richards immediately contacted Mount Rainier via cell phone and was advised by them to chop out a platform on the side of the mountain, secure a tent, and do his best to stabilize Cooley. However, he was also advised by park rangers that rescue was going to be a long and difficult process. Now, when writing this piece, Stephen Lias was able to speak with the survivor of this incident, Scott Richards, and he was kind enough to share with me, both of them were kind enough to share with me the interview that they had. And so here is Richards speaking about his first contact with the park rangers.
He said, I've been pretty clear to me, he said, you're on your own for a period of time. There's nothing we can do. It's going to take us a while to even figure out where you're at. I mean, in not so many words,
Right.
he was like, you need to figure this out. You need to get shelter. You need to take care of yourself for a while until we can get it going. It was very clear. I mean, Mike, this awesome ranger down there, it was very clear to him where I was. It was very clear to him that I was a shitty location.
Yeah.
Now, once Richards was able to get the two of them secured, he settled in to await rescue, but the situation was anything what you would call stable. This is how he described it.
You know, just a heinous situation, a very small pen on a 50-degree ice slope, bad weather, and he had a bad head injury. So the beginnings of a bad head injury are usually met with combativeness, disorientation,
Right.
you know, completely stand up. You know, I had him roped in, stand up, fall down. I mean, you can imagine everything coming out of him.
Yeah.
We were in a 3x6 tent with no fly. I don't know if you know much about tents. It had no fly. It was a high end,
Yeah.
very lightweight mountain hardware.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, the tent had no fly, had huge ventilation. That was the whole thing. So it wouldn't condensate, but it had vestibule but no door. So the way I pitched the tent, the goddamn snow just rained down the slope and just filled it.
Oh, man.
Really was shoveling. You know, and Peter, you know, periods of time, the first day or so, would just, you know, he was in incredible pain, you know, get up and fall over and fall in, I had to block the door, you know.
Yeah.
Blood, basically.
Was he lucid?
Oh, in and out, man. He was a train wreck, you know.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
a claw hammer to the front of your head to take off, you know, above your eyes, that type of deal.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You can imagine. He had a massive head trauma.
So,
You know, so that's what happens with people that come there. Initially, the first couple of days, they're lucid, they're, you know, whatever, and then they slowly, you know.
right.
As this ordeal continued, 2 helicopters and rescue teams consisting of advanced climbers were assembled. The weather was quickly deteriorating and there was no end in sight to the rain and snow. One helicopter did attempt to approach the area for reconnaissance, but was turned away by weather conditions. And at this point, air rescue seemed unlikely, so climbing teams were dispatched to make a rapid ascent of Liberty Ridge and try to reach the climbers that way. They spent one night on the mountain, and then as we reached dawn of May 16th, Cooley was unable to eat or drink, and he was in and out of consciousness. The helicopter teams continued to prepare for aerial evacuation, as well as preparing supply drops for both the ground teams and for Richards and Cooley. And climbers continued to make their way up the mountain towards them. But at this point, more than 60 people are involved in this rescue effort, and international media has now started to pay attention. There was a brief break in the weather during this day that allowed supplies to be dropped to the victims, but no rescue. On the morning of May 17th, Richards and Cooley had now spent 2 nights on the mountain, and 2 more rescue attempts via helicopter have failed. Finally, a 2-person climbing team managed to reach Richards and Cooley and began to prepare for a technical rescue, so taking them down the mountain themselves. However, before they began their descent, a helicopter crew was finally able to reach the site and evacuate Cooley. Richards descended on foot with the climbing team. And when they reached Thumb Rock, they decided to camp for what would be Richards' now 3rd night on the mountain. And it was there that the climbing team received the news that Peter had passed away in the helicopter. He was pronounced dead on arrival at Madigan Hospital. Richards recalled in his interview with Stephen Lias how he felt during that moment.
So when they took Peter off in the helicopter, was your gut feeling that he's all right? We finally got him over the hump. He's gonna make it.
Oh yeah, so elated.
Yeah.
Ideal, man.
Well, that's one of the things that interests me about him.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a moment yeah, you use the word elated. It seems like there's a moment of we made it, we conquered this horrible mess, and then just after you get down to some rock, you get kicked in the pants again.
Yeah.
With the worst news.
I was devastated.
Yeah.
Not at the point where, oh my God, I can't function. I was just,
Right.
I was just, wow.
Yeah.
My best friend is gone, oh my God, the nightmare is continuing. Now the nightmare really is continuing.
Yeah.
And I just didn't even, each moment as it would kind of come down and get him on the helicopter. And then down climbing was no easy task.
Oh, I know, that can't have been
But on the
easy.
major deal, getting me down, getting them down, without, we just didn't want anyone else to get killed.
Right.
That was their whole deal. And I got that. So finally we got to some rock. We're still high on that mountain. And, we're just, okay, hey, we're almost there. Then you get that call, and he told me, and they were bummed. They were bumming out huge too.
Oh, yeah.
So much in. Everybody was. There's so many people that I think it just kicked them in the teeth when Pete died.
Yeah.
Because there was so much energy. Ralph Bell was dealing with the family at home, and oh yeah, we finally got him off. I don't know if you saw a lot of news, but you can imagine, I'm up on the mountain.
Yeah.
For multiple days, and I'm alive, and they're alive, and the rescue goes, and it doesn't go, and it goes. Finally it goes, and they pull Peter off, and oh my gosh, he makes it, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the piece itself, Mount Rainier Search and Rescue. To best comprehend this piece, it's probably best to think of it as scenes in a film. So in the real life event, as you've just heard, the action was all happening simultaneously at several different locations. And as if in a film, the piece contains hard cuts between scenes with no transitions. These are signaled to the listener by the ringing of the chimes, back here by Cameron. And until the last section of the work, those chimes signal those transitions. But near the end, those chimes become like the tolling of a funeral bell. And now we're going to go through kind of all of the major themes and characters of the piece and show you a little bit of how they appear and how they evolve throughout the work and how they evolve over time. And we'll have the players behind me live demonstrate some of these things as well. So when the piece first opens, we get a motive that represents Peter's accident. Note the violent wail in the Barry sax that occurs there at measure 5. Everything that follows up to the first phone call, which we'll discuss in a moment, represents the aftermath of that fall. When this motive returns at the end of the work, though, it represents an emotional wound rather than a physical one. At the beginning, it's the actual accident with Peter. At the end, it's the wound of hearing that Peter had passed away. It's much more subdued and drawn out the second time we hear it. And so we'll demonstrate for you measure 1, titled Crisis on Liberty Ridge, and measure 219, Grief at Thumb Rock. Now, the piece also contains representations of the phone calls between Richards and emergency personnel. In this case, Richards was represented by the alto saxophone, and the emergency personnel are represented by the tenor sax. In these moments, the alto and tenor sax will step out into their positions at the front of the stage, as I'll ask them to do right now. And these proceed very similar to an opera recitative, in that in the player's parts they're given notes, rhythms, and articulations, as well as text to convey. And for tonight's performance, you'll see the text behind me on the screen above. But I do have to put in a little bit of a disclaimer. that none of this text contains any real dialogue from the event or any transcripts from 911 calls or anything of that sort. It's inserted purely in the name of dramatic effect and to give the players a better idea of what emotions they're conveying with their characters. So I'll have them demonstrate for you a little bit of just the first call. This is measure 20 in the piece as a demonstration of this. Thank you. Now the first two occur in very much a similar fashion, but the third contains a big dramatic twist, and I think it's one of the most powerful moments in the piece, so we're actually not going to give it away right now, but I want you to pay close attention to what happens in the third phone call when we play the piece in its entirety. You both can be seated. Thank you. We also have depictions of the lonely, desolate nights on the mountain during this incident. There are 3 of them in the piece, all of which contain an evolving chorale in the marimba parts, as well as eerie soprano and alto saxophone glissandi, which are modified with reverb and delay effects, and haunting metal sounds from the percussion, either bowed cymbals or inverted cymbals on the timpani. So I'll have Blake first demonstrate the first night on the mountain, which is the chorale, the melody only in the marimba. This is from measure 51. Blake, if you would. The second night on the mountain, which is pictured on this slide here, features now the alto and soprano saxophone doing our glissandi effects, along with all the same percussion effects, but now the chorale melody has been expanded into a 4-part harmony, which we'll see at measure 155, and Blake will demonstrate that for us. Now in the third night, it's actually not labeled in the music as a night on the mountain. However, Grief at Thumb Rock, the last section of the piece, that chorale reemerges in the marimba part and is then taken up by the quartet in a final powerful statement of all this. This is from measure 228 in the piece. Note the wailing sounds coming from our soprano sax during that section. These represent the cries of grief upon hearing about the news of the death of Peter. Now, the final 2 sections we need to talk about are the climbing teams and the helicopters. So the climbing teams are represented by a distinct walking or marching feel, and they contain mixed meters which indicate the rough terrain that these climbers are having to navigate. They also have sections that are labeled barbaric ad lib, which are 5/8 bars that represent boulders and snow crashing down the mountainside. The first appearance of these is at measure 25 with a two-part theme. Now, in the second appearance of this, it's much more insistent and more fully scored, and we get the addition of a third theme, which you'll hear at measure 117. Now, true to life, the third appearance of the climbing teams comes at measure 171, and it coincides with the last appearance of the final helicopters, so we'll save that for just a moment. The helicopters are straightforward sections containing 16th note pulses that represent the thrumming of the helicopter blades. We also get wind effects from both the quartet and the electronics during this section. And true to life, that first attempt is thwarted by the weather. The wind sound effects eventually win out over the 16ths of the helicopters. This is from measure 85. The second time we hear the helicopters, they include that supply drop that I talked about a little while ago. This is represented by seemingly random interjections during the 16th notes. This is from measure 144 in the piece. Yet again, the weather wins in that episode. But the final attempt does succeed and ends with a literal depiction of the lift into the helicopter with the rising 16ths in the saxophone part. So this is the last climbing team and the last helicopter together to show how they kind of interact. This is measure 178 to measure 214 in the piece, the last of both. And so that's pretty much all you need to know to really appreciate this work. So I have some concluding thoughts to get through, and then we will do a complete run-through of this piece. First, there are some people that truly need thanking in the room and online tonight, and then we'll give you a chance to experience all of Mount Rainier Search and Rescue. I hope that your experience tonight furthers exploration on your part of Stephen Lias' music. I know I feel strongly about his work, and I hope after tonight you will as well. So first, I have to say thank you to a number of people. To my parents, first of all, whose unconditional love, support, and personal sacrifice has helped me reach this major milestone in my life. None of that would have been possible without you. To my fiancée, Chanel, the love of my life, thank you for your unwavering belief in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. To Mallory Thompson, for seeing the potential within me and relentlessly working to help me realize it myself. I am a transformed person thanks to you and your influence and my time here at Northwestern, so thank you. To Emily Trinan, who is maybe watching on the webcast, thank you for your guidance as I took my first steps on this journey through graduate school. Your patience, support, and continued mentorship mean the world to me. To Stephen Lias, who is kind enough to be with us tonight, thank you again for your generous donation of time and effort to help make this project a reality. It's really been a joy to get to know you and your work on a deeper level. And of course, to the players behind me, as well as the players that have already performed this evening, thank you so much for giving freely, or mostly freely, there was some pizza involved, of your talents to bring this project to life. I really appreciate it. And finally, to all those family members, mentors, colleagues, and friends, too numerous to mention here, thank you for all that you have done and all that you are. Much love to all of you. And so now we'll take a brief moment to get ourselves reset here, and then we will perform our final piece of the evening, Mount Rainier Search and Rescue, in its entirety. Thank you all again for being here, and we'll play this last piece of the evening for you. Thank you.